The Yellow Star, the legend of King Christian X of Denmark. Early in the year 1940, in the country of Denmark, there were only Danes. Tall Danes, stout Danes, old Danes, silly Danes, cranky Danes, and even some great Danes. But no matter how different from each other they seemed, the Danes held one thing in common. All were loyal subjects of their beloved king, Christian. Every morning, their king rode along and unarmed along the streets of Denmark's capital, Copenhagen. Who's that? A curious visitor asked. Why, that's our King Christian, his Danish host responded. Without a bodyguard? Asked the astonished guest. My friend, came the proud reply, a king so loved needs no bodyguard. We Danes would all stand together in defense of our king. Little did the Danes know how much they would need their wise king in the dark days to come. Like a fierce storm, war was spreading across Europe, and even good King Christian was powerless to stop it. Soon, Nazi soldiers gathered like dark clouds at the Danish border. Their arrival in Copenhagen brought food shortages, curfews, and a new flag, which was hung at the palace. The flag stood for war and fear and hatred. The Danes watched and waited to see what their king would do. King Christian sent a Danish soldier to remove the flag. Upon discovering it missing, a Nazi officer demanded to see the king and asked, who took down the flag? I sent a soldier to remove it, replied the king. Oh, you did you? Well, tomorrow another will fly in its place, the officer boasted. Then tomorrow I will send another soldier, to remove it, countered the king. And I will have that man shot, threatened the Nazi. Leaning forward, King Christian said evenly, then be prepared to shoot the king, for I will be that soldier. The Nazi flag did not fly from the palace again. The missing flag became a powerful symbol of resistance, and King Christian subjects found reasons to pass the palace gates to see where it once hung. Yet it was only a small victory, and the king and his people's greatest test was still to come. The terrible news arrived quietly, with leaflets that fluttered down the city of Copenhagen. Effective immediately, all Jews must sew onto their clothing a yellow star, which must be visible at all times, read the sign. The people of Denmark were frightened. They had heard terrible stories. In some places, once Jews wore the yellow star, they were taken away and not heard from again. As before, the people looked to their king. This time, their king was as frightened as his people. Without the yellow star to point them out, the Jews looked like any other Danes. Gentiles and Jews were all Danish subjects who worshipped God in different ways. If King Christian called on the tiny Danish army to fight, Danes would die. If he did nothing, Danes would die. Perhaps it was this riddle of the yellow star that drew King Christian to his balcony that night. The sky was filled with the light of many stars. If you wished to hide a star, wondered the king to himself, where would you place it? His eyes searched the heavens. Of course, he thought. The answer was so simple. You would hide it among its sisters. The king summoned his tailor. The tailor arrived and listened to the king's surprising request. We only have an hour before I ride at dawn, the king said urgently. Can you complete this task in time? Yes, your highness, I'll begin immediately. The tailor bowed respectfully. And you do understand what this means, the king insisted. I do, your highness, as will all of your subjects, he answered with pride. I trust they will, whispered the king, placing as much faith in his Danish subjects as they had in him. The following morning, the King of Denmark, with courage and defiance, rode alone into Copenhagen. He was dressed in his finest clothing. As they watched him pass, the subjects of King Christian understood what they should do. And once again, in the country of Denmark, there were only Danes. Here's an author's note. The story of the Yellow Star is a legend. It may be disappointing to the reader, as it first was to its author, to learn there is no proof that this story even ever occurred. I learned of it as a scrap of a tale told to me by a stranger. Its imagery is so compelling and its humanity is so palpable that I wanted to know more. Over the years, despite collecting various oral versions of the story, researching documents and works of fiction, most notably Lewis Lowry's moving novel, Number of the Stars, I found only unauthenticated references to King Christian's legendary defiance, and I learned of many facts, in their own right, were as powerful as the legend itself. I learned that the beloved King of Denmark did indeed ride unescorted, which means alone, and unprotected through the streets of Copenhagen. Stories about King's support of Danish Jews began to circulate throughout Europe as early as 1943, while the war was still going on, including his threat to wear the yellow star in solidarity with the Jews, as in he was going to stand for what he thought was right. No Jews within Denmark were forced to wear the yellow star, but they were in other countries. Among the Nazi-occupied countries, only Denmark rescued the overwhelming majority of its Jews, which means only Denmark out of all of Europe was able to save so many people. Over 7,000 Danish Jews were smuggled to Sweden in fishing boats, 12 to 14 people at a time, by a group of Danes called the Helsinger Sewing Club. And of the almost 500 Jews deported to Theresienstadt, all but 51 survived, due in large part to the Danish government's intercession on their behalf, which means 500 people were transported and only 51 passed away. That means 449 people were alive and managed to make it through to a safer country. Even though the legend grows stronger, it's interesting to think why. Perhaps we need it. The allegory of the yellow star used by the Nazis to divide and shame became, in this legend, a symbol of unity and hope. It is a story that should be told. What if it had happened? What if every Dane, from shoemaker to priest, had worn the yellow star of David? And what if we could follow that example today against violations of human rights? What if the good and strong people of the world stood shoulder to shoulder, crowding the streets and filling the squares, saying, "You cannot do this injustice to our sisters and brothers, or you will do it to us as well"? What if? That's the end.